Hi and welcome. I'm Steve Martirano, and this is the Behavioral Corner. You're invited to hang with us as we discuss the ways we live today, the choices we make, the things we do, and how they affect our health and well-being. So you're on the corner, the Behavioral Corner. Please hang around a while. Hi, everybody. Welcome again. It's me, Steve Martirano, and this is the Behavioral Corner. If you have somehow gotten lost in the podcast world and find yourself at the intersection of behavior and corner, this is us. This is where we hang, and we always run into interesting people. At least we hope they're interesting, so that you might find out more about what we do and what the intent of the podcast is. Briefly, we call it a podcast about everything because everything affects our behavioral health. So today we're going to take a look at a couple of topics, but centrally focused on anxiety. And what we mean when we talk about anxiety, what distinguishes them as disorders, and how we can treat them. So, as always is the case on the Behavioral Corner, we found somebody we thought would know a little bit about it. In fact, somebody who knows a lot about treating disorders like this. Our guest is Alyson Nerenberg. Dr. Nerenberg is a licensed psychologist. And in spite of the fact she doesn't look like she could possibly have 30 years experience in this field, she does. She is in private practice, and we welcome her to the corner. Doctor, thanks for joining us.
Great, Steve. I'm glad to be here today.
Now, in the interest of full disclosure, Dr. Nerenberg and I could do this over coffee because she's a neighbor of mine. As it turns out, we just realized that the other day we could be shouting out the window at each other. So thanks again for your time. Tell us a little about your practice.
Yes, I have been in Chestnut Hill, same office in Philadelphia, for about 22 years, and I love what I do. I work with all different types of people, and I have 5 therapists that work with me in my practice as my associates, but we see couples, we see individuals. We're working with all different types of people who've experienced depression, anxiety, relationship issues.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And a lot of times anxiety and depression lead to problems in your relationships.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why we thought it would be informative to talk to somebody like you who focuses on interpersonal relationships and the effect various disorders can have on them. I failed to mention that Alyson, may I call you Alyson?
Sure, of course.
Alyson is also the author of a book called The Myth of Happily Ever After, and that's one of the great titles I've ever read.
It's actually No Perfect Love.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Hopefully you like that title as much too.
Oh, I got the first
love,
part.
Shattering the Illusion of Flawless Relationships.
Where did I get The Myth of Happily Ever After? That came from your PR. I saw it somewhere.
I don't know.
Okay, yeah. So No Perfect Love is the title of her book, and we'll talk more about that a little bit down the road. So let's talk about anxiety in general. First of all, how do we describe an anxiety, and which is common, and we all feel it in various degrees? Anxiety is a standalone feature, and then when it becomes a disorder. Can you explain that for us?
Sure. So if I wanted to sum up anxiety, I think I'd just call it fear. Sometimes the fear is unrealistic for the situation. If you think about it, in hundreds of years ago, if somebody was out by a cave actually and they saw a bear, you'd be scared. You'd feel this in your body and you'd know to run. So sometimes the anxiety and the fear reaction is a really great thing because it tells you get out of Dodge, you got to leave. So sometimes it's actually healthy for you. You can feel it when you're walking in a neighborhood where you just feel like somebody's looking at you and you know that feeling in your gut that you need to get out of the way. That fear is really good because it's telling you that this isn't the right situation for you to be in and to protect yourself. It becomes a problem, becomes a disorder if it's intruding upon your life. So if you can't sleep because you're having all sorts of fears and anxieties and you're finding yourself sweating and worrying about every social interaction you've had that day, or if it's impacting your ability to work at your job or, perform in school, if you're constantly worried, that's when it becomes a disorder, if it's impacting your daily functioning.
Yeah, I want to get into it. I know there are varying types of anxiety disorders, and maybe we can talk about a couple of those. But that's an interesting point you make. So, anxiety begins as a survival mechanism that's
Yes.
hardwired into the species.
Yes.
Animals as well feel anxiety, I'm sure, because they're also on the alert for any threat. So here we are, thousands and many thousands of years removed from the fear of being eaten by a tiger. Anxiety is still with us. It
Yes.
must then still have some actual benefit in terms of a survival mechanism. What tips us over? I know you've talked about the effects of it, but what are some of the things that tip us over into that problem area of
Yeah.
anxiety?
Well, I think our whole world has gone kind of nuts. We're
Mm-hmm.
dealing with so much stress, in our culture. We're dealing with the fighting that's going on in Israel. We're dealing with mass shootings that are occurring in Maine and other places. It is so hard for people to just get through a day a lot of times because you see what's around you, and fear is contagious. All you have to do is put on the news and you hear all the negative things that are happening in the world, and that can create anxiety. Plus there's all these expectations we have to do everything well and to get through school and to sign up for things on time. There's anxiety that comes in the everyday living of being able to accomplish all the many tasks that we're all e- expected to do. You're expected to respond to a text message within a few minutes or somebody's going to think you're rude. There's always these expectations which are hard.
You've been speaking to my wife. She's always, what do you mean you haven't answered their email? You've got to answer their email.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So it's
The
interesting
fast
that
pace.
yes, it is interesting that something so ubiquitous, something so common to all of us,
Yeah.
um, should be a disorder for some people. I think maybe, but well, correct me if I'm wrong. Anxiety issues are often undiagnosed and unreported. Is that
Yes.
true?
Yes, it's funny. It actually, I think the statistic was that this is very treatable anxiety disorders, but more than 60% of people who have anxiety don't seek treatment. A lot of times it's because of the stigma of going to a therapist and how that would feel. It's also people don't want to admit they have a problem.
Yeah. Is it? And to what extent is it also thought of as well? Why shouldn't I be anxious?
Yeah.
Why should look at as you just said correctly,
Yeah.
the world is on fire and we are confronted with unbelievable violence in this country on a routine basis. We'll delve into that a little more. So, is that part of the problem as well? That some people just go, well, of course I'm anxious.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be anxious.
In some ways it's normalized, and sometimes it's what we're hearing, and uh, hey, news keeps going. People have jobs to keep giving you information and to get a reaction,
Mhm.
so that you're constantly being triggered by anxiety in the world, so that does contribute to a lot of it.
In addition to the things we've already mentioned, the pandemic was an accelerant, I'm guessing, to
Oh my goodness.
anxiety.
Yes. I mean, the pandemic was tough for so many people. What it was good for was, it in a way, it lessens some of the stigma of getting mental health help. For us therapists, it was rough. I mean, I never worked that hard in my life. I was getting up and going to my office. I felt like I was the only person in Chestnut Hill at the time working, because I would just sit in my quiet office because I couldn't be home with my three kids. My daughters had come home from college and we had a dog there, and I just had to keep doing session after session after session. So it was a time that the whole world felt anxious, and us therapists really had it too, because
Mhm.
we were experiencing the same stress that everybody else was.
Mhm.
But it was happening in real time, and we had to have some solutions.
And yet again, it was another example of, well, why wouldn't you be nervous? There was a airborne, highly contagious virus that,
Yes.
at least at the beginning, looked like it was going to kill everyone it came in contact with. Turns out that that's not the case, but it was still horrible. So, what were people telling you when you were doing not you were doing sessions not unlike this? You were trying to
Yeah.
communicate with them. What were they telling you about their
Well,
anxiety?
It was interesting because for me, I was seeing people who I hadn't seen in years, people who had been in therapy and then hadn't needed me anymore. And we had said goodbye, and then they called and said, "Help, remember me? I worked with you 5 years ago. My marriage is in trouble." Or I'm not speaking to my child, or I feel so sad for all the losses. My kids who are in college have now come home and we're fighting. Addictions were off the chart. People were looking to try and find some sort of control to their worlds that didn't have much control. So
Mhm.
people were drinking more. People were, if you had eating disorders, were really restricting more, trying to control the food that went into their bodies because everything else was so out of control.
Could you tell us who is most or more at risk for an anxiety disorder?
It's interesting. The research says that it's women. Now, I don't know if it's because women are more self identified to go into therapy in general, but it shows that more women are more at risk to have anxiety disorders.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it kind of negatively plays into the stereotype of the shrinking violet or the hysterical woman, and it just may be a case that they're more open about talking about
True. And it may be that there's more, here's my feminist side coming out, but there's more on women of having to handle kids as well as jobs and as well the pressures of running a household. So in some ways, they have to worry about a lot more little details than a
it.
lot of
Yeah,
time men do.
yeah. And men who suffer or not suffer, but men who confront anxiety every day as well. Their problem is more along the lines of well, it's time to man up. You know,
Well,
uh,
true. And I think as I'm talking to you, I'm thinking that sometimes with men, it manifests more as substance abuse. If I'm feeling anxious, instead of sitting in these feelings, I'm going to use drugs or I'm going to drink to not feel this feelings of anxiety.
not all anxieties are the same, are they? What are some of the types of anxiety disorders?
Well, there's generalized anxiety disorder, and that's the type that keeps you up at night, that you're just anxious about everything. You have this sense of doom that occurs.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's also social anxiety, which is when somebody is really nervous about being uncomfortable in a social situation. They're scared of going to a party. They're scared about saying something that's embarrassing or being humiliated, and there's fears there. There's also simple phobias, which are like if somebody's afraid of going on an airplane or driving a car or driving over bridges, or, there's all sorts of different fears. Some are related to experiences that they've had in the past that have been negative.
What I came across reading about anxiety, separation anxiety. Tell me
Oh,
about that.
yes, that happens when people leave, usually the transitions. You first hear about it when you're sending your kid off to preschool or kindergarten, and you see the child who's hanging on to his mom's leg because he's afraid of leaving. It also happens sometimes when you have kids going off to college and they're afraid about the next phase of their life and what they're having, and they're having separation from their family.
Alyson Nerenberg is our guest. Dr. Nerenberg is a licensed psychologist, and we're talking to her about her experience with treating anxiety. This GAD thing, general anxiety disorder, is does that describe a kind of free floating, uh, very vague
It
anxiety?
it often is, and it's often, you don't even know why you're feeling anxious, but it could be you're just feeling the body sensations. It could be that you're finding it you can't sleep because you're worrying about everything from the way of the world to the little things that are occurring on a daily basis.
Yeah. Well, tell us about some of the other physical manifestations of anxiety besides sleeplessness.
Well, one thing that occurs is panic attacks. And that's when your anxiety comes really suddenly. All of a sudden, you get these chest palpitations, and your heart starts racing, and your hands are feeling clammy, or your feet are feeling clammy. And a lot of time, people don't know that this is a panic attack, and they think they're having a heart attack, or they think they're going to die. So a lot of times they go to the ER and they're told to go home, that this is just a panic attack. And it's just all of the fears are coming and it's hitting them quickly and suddenly.
Mhm. I take this opportunity now to find out whether or not during a panic attack, which I've never had,
Mm.
does breathing into a bag actually help? And if so, why?
People say that it does, and it's in a way it's calming you, it's controlling the breathing, and I think breathing is so important that it's when we get anxious, we start breathing quickly. That fast breathing that's out
Mhm.
of control, and that actually makes us more anxious. But if we slow down our breath and take slow, long breaths, that really can change how we're feeling and what we're focusing on.
It's amazing how often breathing plays a part in managing a whole range of emotional difficulties. It's
Exactly.
uh, it's fascinating. Just to get back to this one other area where anxiety manifests itself, I think so commonly, and that is in at night. At
Yeah,
night.
that's
Now,
where mine comes up.
aside from yours and everyone's, but I have a image of an army of people uh, sort of shuffling around a darkened home in the middle of the night, just all over the country, all over the world. There's something about the nighttime. I mean, I understand it's dark and quiet.
Yeah.
Uh, Bob Dylan has a great line. I'm always quoting Dylan. Dylan's line was, let me get it right. Ain't it just like the night to play tricks when you're trying to be so quiet?
Nothing wrong with quoting Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
I love Dylan. Yeah.
So is that a result of just the isolation and the quiet and the mind racing and
Having time to think. I don't know. Mine always would come up, my anxiety in the morning. I'd wake up early.
oh
And I had
really?
a patient once who said, nothing, no good thoughts ever come into my head before 7 in the morning.
That's an I must say that's a strange. I wouldn't. I mean, for me, the mornings have always been okay. I know it was crazy yesterday, but it's another day. Let's give it
Yeah.
a shot. It
Uh-huh.
doesn't sort of
No.
manifest itself. But we have all experienced that feeling where you awake perhaps from a
Uh-huh.
little sleeplessness, and the first thought in your head, if it is not of something pleasant or let's go back to sleep, it is almost invariably something troublesome,
Yes.
and that just triggers it, right?
Yes.
All right, so
And
let's
it
talk.
becomes ruminations. It
Yes,
becomes thoughts that keep going over and over again. That's another sign of anxiety.
that they self manufacture themselves
Yes,
continuously.
perpetuate. Hmm.
Yeah. It's amazing. I want to talk a little bit about what you would recommend. I know there are a couple of ways to treat anxiety disorders, and I want to touch upon a couple of them
Can I
before.
share something that helped me personally?
Yeah,
The
absolutely.
pandemic, I'll tell you, I was super functioning during that time because I had my daughter who was away at college came home. We had all of a sudden I'd be working all day because it felt like my practice like quadrupled because everybody was going through stress. And I'd only have breaks 5 or 10 minutes before the hour. And I thought, oh my gosh, how am I going to be present for my next person? And I had always talked about meditating. I recommended it to other people as being helpful. But during the pandemic, I started doing it myself. And I only had 5 minutes or 10 minutes, but I was listening to an app and it really had guided meditations. I would lay on my sofa in my office instead of trying to have the perfect posture and do it well. I just would let myself listen to a meditation for 5 minutes and I came back feeling better.
You're
It
like,
changed
that's
my brain.
that's a great topic. Along with breathing, which we mentioned about being so integral in this process, meditation is often the go-to place for millions of people. Some people swear their lives would not have meaning if they could not meditate a
Mhm.
certain amount of. And I must tell you, while I understand it, that it benefits many people, can see how it does. I have never been able to put myself in that place. How did you said you recommended it but never did it? How did you
Yes.
get to it?
I didn't I didn't think it could work for me, to be honest, because when I had tried in the past, I had this vision that I had to be sitting in this perfect posture and be it perfectly attuned to the world and meditate and be on a mat and have the right meditation vibe. And in my family, I have 3 kids and a dog. And every time I went to meditate, somebody would find me. They would all come and look for me, or the dog would hear that I closed the door and bark outside. And it wasn't working for me. And then during the pandemic, I didn't have much time, and I let go of having to do it perfectly. And I had this app that was actually, it was a Peloton app that had 5-minute meditations, 10-minute meditations. And I thought, okay, I can commit to that. I'll give it a try for 5 minutes. And once I let go of having to do it perfectly, it really helped.
So you didn't need a dimly lit room with incense burning. You didn't need to be in a lotus position,
You got it.
staring into a candle, saying some word over and over again.
Yes, no mantra, no, it was just, I'm giving myself 5 minutes. I'm giving myself permission to tune out.
Well, let me probe a little here.
Sure.
While you're, because I want to know how this can
Yeah.
work for me.
Yeah.
While you're doing that,
Mhm.
and I think I'm perfectly capable of making that decision you just made to do it that
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
When thoughts still bombarded your mind.
Okay, so what I did, and
Okay.
again, I am no guru on this, but
Right.
what I did was I gave myself permission, whatever came up is okay. So sometimes in those 5 minutes, I'd have these profound moments. Like I'd have this vision, it felt spiritual, it felt connected. Other times, one couple times I fell asleep. And that was okay too, because after the 5-minute meditation was over, I felt more clear for the next session. I felt more clear for the next thing I had to do in front of me, and it helped. Sometimes it helped more than others, but it was just giving myself permission. However I do it is okay. Just get comfortable and listen
And
to it. Not that you're going to be better off than before you started.
and when the thought occurs that, oh, did I remember to pick up the dry cleaning?
Yeah.
Did I feed the dog? You just live with it. You just live with that moment. It's okay.
Live with it, try and recenter yourself back. It's kind of for me like exercise, that sometimes I have this great moment of exercising, and other times I could do a class, I could go for a run and I'll feel wonderful. And other times, it's okay, but I always feel better than when I started. I'm glad that I made an effort. And
What's
I
the name of
also
you?
think exercise is really important for anxiety.
You mean physical exercise, going to the
Physical
gym?
exercise. I also think spending time in nature is so healing for our minds. Just to go outside to take a walk. For me, I walk my dog a lot, and it just
Hmm.
clears my mind, and it's
Hmm.
really good if you're experiencing anxiety.
Well, meditation certainly sounds therapeutic for sure. What are some other techniques? I know that there is what's referred to as talk therapy,
Hmm.
and there's also a medical or medicinal treatment for this.
Yes.
Tell us about the two methods to treat.
Yeah, so there's all different types of therapists who do all different types of talk therapy. Some is cognitive behavioral, trying to change your thoughts, irrational thoughts. Some is acceptance therapy, where you're just accepting where you are and working on being as in the present moment as possible. There's some that look at your childhood, what's caused your anxiety. It's more psychodynamic in nature, but all of it is, it's a way of not being alone. I have a friend who says, "I don't want to be alone in my squirrel cage."
Mm.
It's sharing it with other people, and a good therapist will recommend that you have other people besides just the therapist in your support network. So a good therapist will recommend that you share some of your anxieties with friends. I'm a big believer in journaling and writing things down, so you're getting them out of your head and onto paper. So if I ever couldn't sleep, I would grab my journal and just write what's going on. And just the act of writing it down made me tired and made me kind of let it go. I externalized it. Instead of it being alone in my own head, I put it on paper.
Uh, I think I understand cognitive behavior therapy. I think I do. It has always seemed to me, simply put,
Hmm.
that if you change the way you think,
Hmm.
you will change the way you behave. Is that
Yes,
pretty much it?
it is. I like the 12-step slogan. They say, the bring the body, the mind will follow.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that because, in a sense, it's saying, all right, instead of waiting till you have this moment where you're all of a sudden thinking differently, just do the next right thing. Go for a walk, go out to exercise, call a friend. Don't allow all of the ruminating thoughts to take over.
Your PhD is in psychology and not psychiatry, so I'm guessing that you don't prescribe drugs.
I do not. I
Yeah.
recommend other people, if people have a primary care doctor or a psychiatrist, to help them with the
Yeah.
medication piece.
So I don't know to what extent you're interested in talking about what sort of drugs would they prescribe under what circumstances?
Yeah, there's lots of different types of drugs for this. I mean, I'm not an expert in that. That's not where my training was, but
Hmm.
I feel like sometimes I give the analogy about riding a bike, because I do like to ride a bike, and I think about it when you take the right medication, it's instead of riding on a hill, you're riding on a flat road. It makes it much easier. It's not as much of a struggle.
Yeah. I mean, there are psychiatric or there are behavioral health disorders where
Hmm.
almost the first place you go is drugs. I mean, very
Yeah.
serious cases of, I guess, schizophrenia and
Yeah.
others. That would be the first place. I'm getting that with anxiety issues, it's not the first place you go. It should be.
No, usually I work with somebody through talk therapy, and if it's not working, if after 8 or 10 sessions they're still struggling, and I look at it, are you not sleeping? Are you not eating? Is this impacting your daily functioning still? Then we need to, get an outside consultation with a psychiatrist. So I don't use drugs as the first way of treating it.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
if I feel like after a certain amount of time that we don't see that just the talk therapy and the self-care techniques making a change, then sometimes I recommend going to a psychiatrist.
And I mean, I don't know, I don't have any experience here, but I would suspect that many psychiatrists don't begin with, well, let's give you some antidepressants or something. I think they would begin also with sort of talking it out before they got to
Some
that
do,
step.
some don't. Some
Yeah,
are so used to relying on the medical model and finding the right
yeah,
medication.
yeah.
So, often what you want to create is a team. So a therapist who will talk to your primary care doctor or who will talk with your psychiatrist and say, hey, we've been trying talk therapy and I feel like, you know, she's still not able to sleep, and she's still, it's impacting her daily functioning. This is what I'm suggesting she gets a consultation with you.
We're speaking to Dr. Alyson Nerenberg. She is a licensed psychologist. We're dealing with anxiety specifically. Um, let me ask you, sort of in the last area here. Uh, we have as we record this, yet another horrific mass shooting in Maine. At this recording, 18 people are already dead. Uh, the entire state of Maine seems to be in lockdown, and the rest of the country is also reminded that we're not safe in an absolute sense
Yeah.
because of the violence that of mass shootings. And I'm going to use a horrible expression here, but how do we arm ourselves
Yeah.
against the anxiety of a real threat like mass shootings overwhelming us?
Our world has become pretty scary with
Mm-hmm.
all these things that have been occurring. And what I recommend, and I'm not meaning to minimize it, but is to do as much self-care as possible, and to really build up your supports, whether it's exercising, whether it's talking to a friend, whether it's, staying connected, whether it be with your church or your synagogue, just staying part of community, and realize that we're all kind of doing grieving for the lives that are lost, grieving for the tragedies, grieving for the fact that some of our times our kids can't even go to school and be safe. There's so much that we're all struggling with, and kind of we need to use each other for support.
Yeah, it's great advice. Um, if someone wants to talk to a professional like yourself about issues of anxiety or whatever, what I don't think enough people understand that that's a process as well. And sometimes you have to audition people. You have to find
Got it.
the right person. You
Yeah.
recommend, do most people refer to you through other people that have been to you, or?
Very much so. And that's one of the first questions I ask. How did you hear about me? And usually it's from a friend. And I feel like so much of it's chemistry and a connection, because therapy is a relationship just like other relationships, and not everybody's going to be the right fit for everybody
And
else.
it's okay to sit there at that first session and maybe not make the connection after a couple, and just politely say, I'm gonna find somebody else.
Well, I feel like when you have a good therapy relationship, it feels like you're coming home. You
Mhm.
feel welcomed, you feel safe. You don't want to feel anxious, like, does this person not understand me?
I got it. All right, let's conclude this. I want to find out about your book. You
Yeah,
wrote this. You wrote this over a year ago, I think.
I wrote it during the pandemic,
Yeah,
actually.
there you go.
I
Perfect use of your time.
Well, it was funny. My husband had said to me, "You've been talking about writing this book for the past, we've been together 27 years." And he said, "For almost 27 years that I've known you, he said, you've been talking about writing this book. If you don't write it now, when are you ever going to write it?" Because we were home more, and we're usually pretty social people, and we were, a lot less was on our plate in some ways.
So
Yeah.
that's where No Perfect Love came from. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that?
Well, I meant that there's so much expectations on all of us for our own we're all, you hear about perfectionism. There's been a lot of books written where people are hard on themselves, and they have this inner critic where they expect themselves to be perfect. But I think we also put that on our partners. We expect perfection, and somebody to completely understand us. We have these expectations on our children. You look at social media and you see all these happy families and people who look perfect. There's so much pressure, even from the time we're little kids, and we hear fairy tales, and we expect romantic comedies, everybody to be perfect. And so much of real life is messier than that. And you're going to be with a person who may have some anxiety, and you may have your own stuff. And it's, how can you work through the messiness?
Mhm. And we're we're constantly being fed the counter story there, which is the queen of pop music will meet the star athlete,
Oh, yeah.
and they will have this perfect relationship. And why can't I have it? And so it's good to remind people that's probably not the way it usually works.
No, and a lot of times those crash and burn when they
Yeah,
realize that
yeah,
their
yeah,
partners are not perfect. And,
yeah, yeah.
this is the messiness of life. And can we embrace what is instead of what should be?
Mm. Well, that's absolutely true. And the only person I can think of who has enriched herself by that dysfunction is Taylor Swift, who takes
Mm.
every burned out relationship and turns it into gold. So good for her.
Mhm.
Dr. Alyson Nerenberg, those of you in this area, the Philadelphia area, want to find out more about her practice and how to reach her. She has a website, which we will have a link to on the Behavioral Corner. And I'm assuming you and your associates are accepting new patients.
Yes, some people in my practice have availability. We do our best to bring in new people. Yes.
Terrific. Where's your book available? Amazon and all that?
Yes, it is available at Barnes and Nobles, at Amazon, wherever you buy books.
Well, we appreciate that. We appreciate your time, and so we're neighbors. If we don't do this again, we should wind up bumping into each other on the avenue, at the
I
very
bet I'll
least.
run into you in Starbucks now.
Okay, Alyson Nerenberg, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye
Thanks
bye.
for
And
having
the rest of you guys, don't forget, you know how to do it. You follow us, you like us, you even critique us. We can handle that. But join us on the Behavioral Corner. We'll be back. Bye bye.
Retreat Behavioral Health has proudly been serving the community for over 10 years. Here at Retreat, we believe in the power of connection and quality care. We offer comprehensive, holistic, and compassionate treatment from industry-leading experts. Call 855-802-6600 or visit us at www.retreatbehavioralhealth.com to begin your journey today.
that's it for now. And make us a habit, hanging out at the Behavioral Corner. And when we're not hanging, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter on the Behavioral Corner.